Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again for another episode of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you've had a really good start to your week, still enjoying Euro 2024. The games are never ending, and to be fair, so far it's been a really entertaining tournament, so hopefully it stays that way, and hopefully the Chelsea players, the few Chelsea players involved, don't get any injuries that impact them for pre-season. But got some stuff to get through today. In recent days, I want to give you my thoughts on the fixture list. Not extensive thoughts because they never are at this time of the year, but also transfer news and Chelsea surprise striker targets. There's been a lot of news around this in the past 24 hours in terms of some shock targets, in terms of the progression on other targets, and some of the things that I think Matt Law said to the London is Blue pod was quite interesting once again. So we'll delve into all of that. Please do hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button. If you haven't checked out, I know a lot of you did, but if you want to go back on the show, the podcast feed as well, had Nini FC on over the weekend, and we had a extensive conversation about Chelsea. So thank you for those who enjoyed that collab. Let me know some of the people you want to get on the show. Chelsea related guests. I am planning to have more guests on, especially at this time of the year. It feels like a perfect time whilst the Euros are on to have some guests on, speak about Chelsea, speak about football, and you guys seem to enjoy it as well. But let's start off with the fixtures. There used to be a time where I do, and maybe it was just timing this year, but I usually do sort of a reaction video to this, and it was kind of a annual thing. But you just realise after a while there isn't really much to say about the fixture list because we know who we're going to be playing if you know what the Premier League table is before the fixtures get announced. And, you know, I think that there's a way to overthink these things. I think more interesting to me is kind of key points throughout the season. Boxing Day, Chelsea versus Fulham. I love the fact that it's Chelsea versus Fulham. Really throwback Barclays game, mid-2000s. I really hope they don't move that Boxing Day game at the Bridge. How the season will end. And I think more importantly this year for Chelsea, and is quite relevant, is how the fixtures line up with European commitments, because we know a lot of games, if Chelsea get through that playoff round in August, is going to be moved, you know, from a Thursday and then moved Premier League games back to a Sunday. But obviously the big news from yesterday was the fact that we start against Man City. You know, I think that I saw a lot of people getting very scared about it, and I do still find it quite funny, because all I ever hear about is how the standards of Chelsea are no longer that high. But then the same people get really depressed that Chelsea have to play someone good, and it's like, if Maresca wants a perfect start, I mean, what is a bigger confidence boosting win than beating Man City on the opening game of the season? And, you know, beyond that, the opening 5 games, 4 of the opening 5 games, I think are winnable games that Chelsea should be seen as the favourites as. So I don't buy into a lot of kind of the fear-mongering around it. You know, you're going to have to play these teams eventually, and Man City is one of the toughest games, probably the toughest game in the league season, so getting one of them out the way quickly is nice. And I did see in the fixture list that Liverpool, I believe it's one of those first times we're actually playing at Anfield pre-Christmas. It always feels like that game is switched around, but there are other ones, and I'm sure we'll get close to the time, we'll speak about it more. But I'm just interested for pre-season now and getting us into a good place, and who will be in that starting 11 come that opening game against Man City, I think is a more interesting question than actually dissecting the fixture list. And I think the first thing to speak about is obviously this striker news. A surprise target that Chelsea are in talks over Atletico striker Samu Omorodion. This is from Matt Law. I know David Ornstein reported on this, and it has been rejected, apparently, Chelsea's approach. But it is believed, this is from Matt Law, that Chelsea informed Atletico that they would be willing to pay 25 million, rising to over 30 million for Omorodion, but the Spanish club value him higher. He spent last season on loan at Deportivo, where he scored 8 goals and enhanced his rep as one of the most promising young strikers in Europe. Apparently, Atletico are reluctant to let the player go, and of course already turned down a bid from Chelsea. This is in the midst, of course, of Chelsea trying to go out for Jhon Duran from Aston Villa. Obviously, Matt Law is an Aston Villa fan and does obviously have some very good connections along with what he reports at Chelsea. And it seems like, you know, that still has some way to go in terms of whether Chelsea are going to get him over the line. Me and Nini spoke about Duran. Please go and check that out in one of our recent, I think it was my last video on the channel, last show. I found what Matt Law said on the London is Blue pod actually quite interesting, just in terms of what Chelsea are reportedly looking for in terms of a striker. They want someone who is, of course, I think a little bit more physically imposing. I think you want someone who is an alternative to Nicholas Jackson. You know, I don't really see the point of finding someone of the same profile of Jackson. So someone who's maybe a little bit more physically imposing, but then also one apparently that can drop deep, go wide. They feel like they need a versatile forward, someone who isn't, going to be stuck inside the 6-yard box, not just going to be a battering ram, not just going to be a focal point, someone who is flexible enough that in a system that is going to require a centre forward to drop deep. I think, again, a lot of this sounds, really theory based, and I look at what Nicholas Jackson did last year, and I think actually if you look at a lot of the best forwards for Chelsea, that's what they did. I mean, Diego Costa, sorry to bring him up, take a drink when Son of Chelsea mentions Diego, but if you watch Diego, he was an all-round striker. I think most good strikers are. I know you get the likes of Olivier Giroud, who maybe are more of your poachers, who are going to be inside the 6-yard box, but I don't find that like the biggest thing, but at least there is some consistency to the way Chelsea are trying to recruit a striker this year. I think in terms of this one, I look at him and from what I've gauged, yes, sure, he had an all right season last year, but again, it's not a major upgrade. And actually, when you compare him to Duran, who didn't have a lot of minutes to Aston Villa, but played, I think, at a higher level in the Premier League, I like him more. And although it would cost less, I don't necessarily means that buying cheaper all the time means you're getting the best quality. And on top of that, I think my big concern, and this is my concern across Chelsea's recruitment this year, is buying really raw players. And I think that's what even the most flattering comp I've seen for the player, along with looking at some numbers and people talking about the player in a little bit more depth, he is very raw. And I think that this is my issue, right? That for as raw as, say, Duran is, do you really want to be put in a situation where Chelsea find themselves with another player that's going to take 6 to 8 to 12 months to mature? And I'm not saying that Duran wouldn't be that. I just, I think that there's a concern just generally of signing those type of players. And I do like the idea of signing an alternative to Nicholas Jackson because he did so well. But as other people point out, I think it was also from the London Blue Pod, Nick Villaney, I think, tweeted out like these comparisons of Jackson versus basically most of the targets that have been linked to Chelsea this summer. And barely any of them are better than Jackson. And I come back to this, and it's why I'm really propping up signing Michael Olise, because I do think that is an upgrade. It, maybe not, sufficient to Cole Palmer, because obviously individually he had an amazing season for Chelsea, but miles better than Mykhailo Mudryk. I think he's better than Noni Madueke, even though I like Noni as a player. That's the issue, right? If you're not signing someone who's significantly better, is it just a lateral move or a downgrade, which is, I think, more of a concern. There are obviously alternatives. There's Dom Solanke being mentioned, which I think would be a very good signing because, he did score 19 Premier League goals last year. I think he really developed as a centre forward. Some of the goals he scored I thought were just brilliant. But he is it's not that he can't do the all-round game, but, in terms of if you watch his goals inside the box, but he is more physically imposing. And Tammy Abraham, one of my favourite players, Tammy, he's had a lot of injury problems at Roma, but apparently could be returning to the Premier League for about 22 million this summer, which, given what Tammy could still produce in his career, I think could be a steal. I think on a broader point, one of the other things that Matt Law said that I think we need to keep in mind now for the rest of the month, not only June, because we'll see how integral and kind of key that June the 30th deadline is for Chelsea, but for the rest of the transfer window really, is apparently Chelsea they feel that it's going to be a really, really grueling season. And they expect, because they're kind of factoring in the Club World Cup next summer, which they're taking really seriously, as Chelsea could play up to like 75 or 80 games next season, which sounds outrageous. It really does. But that's factoring in, of course, going deep in basically every competition. You had, 38 games in the Premier League. You had going deep in both cup competitions. You had going deep in, obviously, the Europa Conference League. There's a lot of games there in terms of a playoff, the group stage and a knockout stage, which I believe... obviously there's 2 legs within that and you're hoping to get all the way to the final and win it. And then, of course, you add on to that the Club World Cup at the end of the year. So having a flexible squad to be able to swap players in and out, have fresh legs throughout the course of the season, I think there is a hope that at least Kendry Pires will be available by next summer at the Club World Cup, because it kind of, as I say, is in the middle of 2 seasons. So that to keep in mind too with Chelsea's transfer business. But it seems like a striker is kind of one of those big priorities. It seems like Olise obviously is one of the big priorities. And I like that, right? I think that if you can't get Michael Olise, you know, again, I wouldn't want to be stepping down in terms of quality, because then you're probably just going to buy yourself another Noni Madueke or Mykhailo Mudryk, and I don't really see the point in that. You know, again, if you're going to go over Olise, despite some of the concerns over clutter in the long term, over having left-footed right wingers, I do think that is a real step up in quality. So that's why I think it's worth investing in that player, because I think he does instantly improve what we have. I think the striker situation is a little bit more complex. I think out of the targets, I think Dom Solanke is a really good shout, just in terms of someone who scored, as I say, nearly 20 Premier League goals last season. I don't think you can underrate that for Bournemouth. He really led the line, really developed. Obviously, Tammy, we know what Tammy did previously for Chelsea, but I can't see that happening this year. And obviously, Duran is someone they're really hot on. But Omorodion, I mean, maybe you guys know a lot more about him than I do, but I don't see this as kind of like uncovering a gem. I really don't. And as I say, when you've already got Nicholas Jackson, are you just trying to repeat the trick again? So it's a complex thing, right? What is the key thing? Is it having a bigger squad? And because you have a bigger squad, because you have more games, actually it doesn't matter signing more raw players because they will get sufficient minutes? Or actually, are you just in some cases buying players who, in terms of rotation, are not going to be impactful enough? I think the difference between Omorodion, especially the reason for signing Duran, is he's already proven at Aston Villa he can be quite an impactful squad player. He can be quite a good player off the bench. So I think already he's shown in being a rotational figure, sporadic for Unai Emery. He's proven to be impactful. So I think that's why there's a justification for signing him, when signing maybe someone who's a lot rawer, who does need sufficient first team minutes and probably does need a season of being first teamer, when you've just given that to Nicholas Jackson, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So those are my thoughts. Please let me know yours in the comments below, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.